Once upon a time, there was a seeker who got himself into an asylum, made his way to the front desk, and asked for the one who calls himself the holder of the story. A look of puzzlement crossed the worker's face. "Who?" she asked. "The holder of the story," was the response. She insisted that she knew nothing of what he spoke. Many times did the seeker repeat his name and insist on visiting him. He grew angry when he was denied. Soon enough, the receptionist threatened to call security. The seeker was smart. He ceased and walked away, knowing he had failed in his quest. The next morning, he did not awaken. They knew his purpose and had found him. The end. Upon a time, there was a seeker who got herself into a library and asked the librarian for one who calls himself the holder of the story. The librarian disappeared underneath the counter and came back up with a library card. On it written in unrecognizable words in an indescribable language, and the seeker's name was written in her language. She accepted it gratefully, hiding the surprise and dread that lay thickly in her stomach. The librarian pointed to the section of the library that she had not seen before, and she walked away without a word. The seeker made her way to the section. Its shelves were lined with old tombs bound with skins of creatures unknown to her. Their titles were in a language unknown to her, but with each title she read, the clearer and clearer their meaning became. They were stories of redemption, of romance, of adventure. The mere titles brought tears to her eyes. There were tales of both familiar and alien themes. Something within her longed for these stories, just as we all long for answers to our questions and solutions to our problems. The temptation to read then became greater and greater, almost unbearable. Her curiosity was like a great weight on her shoulders. She saw no harm in pulling a book out and skimming through it. The words were unknown to her, but the images of the story manifested itself. Soon enough, she knew the story and carefully put the book back. In place of her burning temptation was an odd certainty. An old blind man dressed in a single white cloth approached her and asked for her library card. The seeker gave it to him. He put it away. "What's your story?" he asked. The story she had read spilled from her lips against her volition. The words she spoke were in a language that she had read. Even when her tongue twisted and cramped, she spoke on. The last words of the story were the last words she ever spoke. The old man returned her library card. In place of her name was the last word of the story. She accepted it and returned home. Her path had been chosen, and she knew what to do. It attracted them. She could neither scream nor beg. The end. Once upon a time, there was a seeker who got himself into a library and asked the librarian for the one who called himself the holder of the story. The librarian disappeared underneath the counter and came back up with a library card. On it were written unrecognizable words in inconceivable languages. The seeker's name was written in his language. He accepted it gratefully, hiding the surprise and dread that lay thickly in his stomach. The librarian then pointed to a section of the library he had not seen before and walked away without a word. The seeker made his way to this section. Its shelves were lined with old tombs bound with skins of creatures unknown to him. Their titles were in a language unknown to him, but with each title he read, clearer and clearer their meaning became. The stories were of redemption, of romance, of adventure. These mere titles brought tears to his eyes. They were tales with both familiar and alien themes. Something within him longed for these stories, just as we all long for answers to our questions and solutions to our problems. The temptation to read these stories was almost unbearable. His curiosity was a great weight on his shoulders, and yet he still continued on. Soon enough, and yet it took too long, the seeker came upon an old blind man dressed in a single white cloth. The old blind man asked the seeker for his library card. The seeker gave it to him. The old blind man put it away and asked, "What is your story?" "I have none," he responded. "Tell me his." The old blind man smiled from his mouth and spilled his story, never conceived by any author. It was spoken in a language that the seeker could not understand, but the meaning was very clear indeed. But the speaker's mind was weak and easily broken by the story. Upon the last word, his sanity failed him, and the story remained in his mind and still does to this day as he wanders the maze-like shelves of the hidden section of the library. The end. The story is object number 330 out of 538. It has been determined by many ends, but it is up to you to determine its own.